So on March 11th, Dylan Mulvaney, a popular trans TikTok creator who rose to fame when she began documenting her transition on TikTok just over 2 years ago, released her song called Days of Girlhood. People spared no effort in denouncing the song, claiming that it is a mockery of women that perpetuates misogynistic stereotypes. It has even received responses from the likes of Ben Shapiro and Miss Candace Owens herself. Without any further ado, let's get into it. Now, the general consensus among people condemning Dylan and her song are that they misrepresent girlhood by chalking women up to retail therapy, sleeping around, popping prescription pills, and other superficial traits. And therein lies the cognitive dissonance. Because for months, we've seen women, mainly cisgender women, might I add, participating in the I'm just a girl trend, talking about how they're bad at video games and order their boyfriends around and can't go anywhere without their Stanley. All stereotypes that predominantly negatively affect teenage girls. Yet none of these people have been this massively condemned. And let's not forget some of the most widely notable songs from massively influential singers and performers, which contain lyrics that by this logic would also be minimizing and mocking womanhood. For instance, practically the entirety of Ariana Grande's 7 Rings, Madonna's Material Girl, Katy Perry's California Girls. All songs that at the surface level seem to almost glorify stereotypes that overbearingly negatively affect women, and all of which were written by, you guessed it, cisgendered women. And people have claimed that this is incomparable because the songs aren't about girlhood in general, and that is just it. As she has clarified, the purpose of Dylan's song is not to be a reflection of how you experience girlhood, nor did she intend to be representative of all women and capture girlhood in its entirety. It is solely to encapsulate Dylan's early days of her transition and her experiences as a transgender woman, which could not have been made clearer, especially considering the series that made her popular in the first place, which details her transition, being titled Days of Girlhood, as well as her posting the video marking the 2nd year of her transition the day she released the song. And not only to make the statement that women should be allowed to freely enjoy these things, but to allow other trans women to resonate with the experience of basking in those ditzy stereotypes about women in the earlier stages of their transition, because they were never given the freedom to do so. Which leads me into my next point. The majority of arguments condemning Dylan and her song are cisgendered women and TERFs attempting to be critical and outing themselves as transphobic, and simply being blatantly transphobic. One comment in particular says, it's ironic because the lyrics perfectly describe how a misogynistic male views women, and I'm sure it's clear to most people watching this video what this statement is intentionally implying. Many are claiming that she thinks womanhood is a costume and a joke, which aren't much unlike the criticism she's received for simply existing as a transgender woman on the internet. I've seen many creators just say absolutely horrible things regarding her identity, with seemingly no remorse. I've seen multiple videos and comments not only calling Dylan he, but also referring to Dylan as a confused adult man, a misogynist who acts out a caricature of girlhood, and saying you would understand what being a woman is if you were actually a woman. Just to name a few. Specifically, I've seen multiple videos from right-wing TikTok creator Brenna Brown, who has been persistently and excessively critical of Dylan specifically for a long time on TikTok, who made this video a couple days ago referring to Dylan as a misogynistic, pathetic mockery to women, and posted this video a day later making sure to reinforce her belief that Dylan is a man practically every time she said her name.
So Dylan Mulvaney, the man that's been cosplaying as a woman for the past 2 years, just released a new song that's about girlhood. Apparently to Dylan, a man, girlhood is prescription drugs, being lazy, retail therapy, and one-night stands. A pretty typical sexist view that a man would have of women, if you ask me.
I especially want to include this video by a girl whose name I will not be revealing.
Just within the pre-chorus of this song, it literally pushes every negative stereotype about women that real women have been trying to combat for years. Every disrespectful thing that men have to say about women, that all they do is shop, that they all need therapy, that all they do is hook up, every single negative stereotype that women have to fight against, this song just reaffirms. And keep in mind, it's being reaffirmed by someone who doesn't know what womanhood is. If a man who is not attempting to identify as a woman wrote this song and said that it was from a woman's perspective, everybody would freak out. People continue to invalidate the female experience by giving platforms to people who don't even understand it and have no right to be able to talk about it. As a woman, I refuse to reaffirm people who do not understand my experience, do not understand my life, don't understand the things that I struggle with, who monetize it and make jokes off of it and push negative stereotypes, making a mockery of women in general. And if you're a woman and you do support this, you've been indoctrinated by culture and what society is telling you is right and that you have to support because it's not okay. And any woman with sense knows this is wrong.
A few things here. Firstly, notice the multiple phrases that she uses throughout her video to disrepute Dylan's identity and insinuate that she's not a woman, such as real woman and if a man who is not attempting to identify as a woman wrote this song. Even if you believe that the goal of Dylan's song was to perpetuate misogyny, which, as we've established, it's not, you can defend your point without being transphobic and invalidating Dylan's identity. This is nothing more than transphobia and transmisogyny masquerading itself as activism. Secondly, in one of her final statements, she says if you're a woman and you support this, you've been indoctrinated by culture and what society is telling you is right and that you have to support. And not only is it problematic to assert that all women who are accepting of Dylan's song and do not align with your perspective are simply victims of indoctrination, but it's pretty ironic considering that so many people immediately jumped on the bandwagon to condemn Dylan, a trans creator who has received vitriol for her identity by extremist right-wing media since she's made her presence on the app, for writing a song that supposedly reinforces negative stereotypes against women, despite the existence of mainstream songs by cisgendered artists with similar lyrics. Finally, to address the overarching point of her video, she and many others are just outwardly invalidating Dylan's experience as a trans woman by claiming that she has not experienced many of the social and physical consequences women receive simply for being women. One person in particular says, "I've had 8 surgeries for endometriosis and painful periods that put me in the hospital," and others saying that she hasn't experienced misogyny. Talking points like these not only labels these experiences as some kind of prerequisite for simply being a woman, but also invalidates the mass trans misogyny that Dylan has experienced since she first made her appearance on the app. There's also this video.
Dylan Mulvaney will never drive to a gas station and wonder if it's safe to get out of the car. Dylan Mulvaney will never know what it's like to go on a run at night and wonder if you're not going to come back to your house. Dylan Mulvaney will never know the joys and horrors of childbirth. Dylan Mulvaney will never walk into a bathroom and wonder if there's a man hiding behind the door that is going to attack you and you have nothing that you can do because you are biologically weaker than that man. But I will never know the horrors and the traumas and the torturous things that Dylan had to go through in order to want to entirely disassociate from himself. Will never understand the pure suppressed feelings of terror that he had to go through in order for him to no longer want to be in his body. I will never understand the pain, fear, and abuse that he went through in order for his brain chemistry to become altered. I will never understand the depths of trauma threaded so deeply into his brainwaves that he no longer wants to be a man. I will never understand the horrors that he went through that made him quite physically not want to be in his own body anymore. And because there's so many things that I don't know, and I will never know, I'm willing to give Dylan grace.
This entire video exists to compare 2 things: the physical experience of cisgendered women in the United States and her anecdotal, watered-down perception of how transgender people live internally and physically. 1. Saying that Dylan will never go on a run in fear that she won't come back home, or walk into a girl's bathroom in fear of being attacked by a man, or drive to a gas station in fear for her safety, all completely disregard transgender people who are attacked and killed for being transgender. 2. You spend the second half of your video essentially downplaying the trans experience by suggesting that trans people only experience the desire to transition due to trauma. And while people who live with gender dysphoria experience trauma because of it, experiencing trauma alone does not simply give people dysphoria, nor the desire to change their gender identity. If anything, the trauma is more often a direct result of that dysphoria and the hate they experience from other people because of their identity. And 3. I understand that what I have described may not be the experience of all trans women, and that Dylan may very well have undergone these experiences. The problematic nature of this video lies within the assumption that this is her experience. And besides, we know that you're just pretending to have sympathy for Dylan, not just so you can perpetuate your transphobia and transmisogyny and invalidate the real experiences of trans women, but also so you can further reinforce the idea that transgenderism is nothing more than a trauma response. Dylan may not have an identical experience to that of cisgendered and AFAB people, but she is a woman and is experiencing and embracing her womanhood in her own way. Overall, I find it so embarrassing and heinous that so many people, including people in the queer community, are not only choosing to denounce Dylan, her song, and her identity by calling it misogynistic when she's making a song for fun about her personal experience with womanhood after not being able to experience womanhood until becoming an adult, but also using this logic to attempt to rationalize and safely interact with their transphobia. It is insane how so many people seem to have the inability not only to look at statements above the surface level, but to accept the fact that girlhood is different for every woman and exists for women of all types, including transgender women. And this trend has brought to light what was already clear. Transgender women are, always have been, and always will be overly, unfairly, and inhumanely critiqued and ridiculed simply for being transgender women, especially by being compared to cisgendered women. Very interesting to see how criticisms that have been continuously weaponized against transgender women suddenly don't apply to cis women. Thank you all for watching, and have the day you deserve.